Welcome to another edition of Sundays with Hank here on April 19th of 2020. Hank Mormon, whose real name was Ira Eugene Mormon, was a legendary figure back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s here in McLeansboro and Hamilton County. And I have done a few other videos that tell stories of him. And some of them, like I said, he's pretty legendary. Well, anyway, today I'm not going to tell you the stories that I wrote, but I'm going to talk about stories that are in this hardbound book, the Goshen Trails. That was a paper or pamphlet that used to be put out by our library or historical society. There's one article that spans two editions from 1979, January of 1979 and April of 1979, that's about Hank Mormon. Articles were submitted for what's called an oral history project from time to time about people or events or things or maybe buildings or houses. Well, this was about Hank Mormon. I'm not going to read this. If you would like to have a copy of this book and the other volume, the Historical Society, I don't know if they have any more copies of it, get a hold of Ryan Nelson. There are some great articles in this book about the history of Hamilton County. Now, someone submitted the stories about Hank for the Goshen Trails, and they were at odds and issues about whether to put them in here or not. There were some that felt like they weren't true, some that felt like they shouldn't be putting a story about Hank, stories about Hank in this issue, but it got done. And in this story that spans two issues, if I read it, it would take over a half an hour. It would take about 40 minutes to read out loud, and I'm not going to do that because of copyright laws. But I am going to just mention a few of the stories that are in this article in these two editions. I don't know if any of you remember one of the cafes where the park is on the northwest corner of the square. PJ's Cafe used to be there one time, but before that it was Irene's Cafe. Irene Mundy ran that cafe, and Hank would go to that cafe and eat and talk with Irene a lot. Irene tells a few stories in this article that's in the Goshen Trails in this edition that is in this hardbound copy. She tells that they would have conversations about when they were back in school and things that they had to memorize. And she mentioned in this article that she was trying to recite the Gettysburg Address and Paul Revere's Ride and had a tough time trying to remember those things that she had done back in school. And some of the other guys there at the cafe tried. Well, she had done the best job of getting not most of it, but some of it correct. And she said that she looked over at Hank, and he just smiled and shut his eyes, and he proceeded to recite the Gettysburg Address, all of it, Paul Revere's Ride, all of it, and also The Raven, which is, I believe, by Edgar Allan Poe, and I think it's about 18 verses. And he recited that. She said then he got up and just walked out, and they all just kind of looked at each other because they thought Hank was crazy and didn't know anything and not very smart. And there he had recited those three: Paul Revere's Ride, The Raven, and the Gettysburg Address. She also mentioned that she knew about Hank's rooster, and Hank would bring that rooster and leave it out in his car. She said that rooster was beautiful, but there were some guys really did a cruel thing once. they went out and ended up killing that rooster. And she was very upset about it, and so Hank threw a fit about that. She also mentions about Hank had a dog once that he would stake out over at the courthouse, and the dog would lay on the steps. And then he got the idea one day that he was going to buy a lot of rope and let that dog roam a lot more. Well, he bought yards and yards and yards of rope, enough that Irene said Hank's dog could travel that whole courthouse lawn and even come over to go over to Irene's cafe across the highway. That dog had that much rope on it. Hank really did some funny things. She mentioned that Hank was a prolific letter writer. Judge Jones was interviewed for this article, and the judge said that Hank would write letters to the presidents, whoever was president of the United States. So I guess he did it on several occasions across 2 or 3 different presidents about things he liked or didn't like about what was going on with the country. They said Judge Jones said that Hank also wrote the St. Louis Cardinals, that he wrote a letter to Red Shandies to tell him that he wasn't playing the players in the right positions, the right part of the lineup. And Hank got a letter back from the Cardinals, from the Bush family, that gave him a lifetime pass to the Cardinal games. Irene is not sure whether Hank got to use that pass or not, but she said that he had it and was very proud of it. But anyway, those are just a few of the stories about Hank that's in the articles that are in this hardbound book, the January and April issues of 1979 of the Goshen Trails. And that's really all for this edition of Sundays with Hank. Hope you enjoyed it.